Welcome everybody. This is a bolt-on audio session following up from our NEC for FM webinar that we recently carried out. I'm Rob Gerard, NEC Users Group Secretary. I'd like to reintroduce John Bowen, who's the immediate past chair of the Procurement Special Interest Group at BIFM. We answered on the day a number of queries that were sent through, but we had a number that were left over and subsequently sent, so we thought we'd get together and give you the answers. So first question is from Ian Tate, and it says, have you any recommendations for how to set up an evaluation matrix for an FM contract, please? Very customary of me. John, would you like to have a go at this one?
Thank you, Bob. Yeah, good morning, all. This one actually could be a whole webinar in itself. But I think in a nutshell, the simplest way is literally to keep it simple. Work from the key performance indicators that you've outlined in your specification. Break down any service elements within that and set up your spreadsheet accordingly. It's a lot easier to compare when you're doing an evaluation matrix. It's much easier to compare against an input specification than it is against an output specification. And I think that's why the input specification still tends to prevail so much. But the difficulty that most clients have is that they want to break down the responses they get in the matrix in a way that the suppliers don't use when they put their cost models together. So if you want to get an effective matrix, I think the easiest way is to keep it simple. Just use headline numbers so you set them up against your KPI you've outlined in the specification. And then if you want more information against a particular line from a particular supplier, you can contact them and drill down against that. But to do the comparison, keep it simple, keep it as short as possible, as few boxes on the matrix as possible, and then you can get a much more effective way of setting one up to evaluate your tenders.
Okay, is that something that's available at BIFM then? Is there some guidance on that, or?
Not that I'm aware of, actually. It's an interesting point, and maybe that's something that the procurement team could have a look at and put a short paper out on.
Sounds good. Stick that on the to-do list then. Very good.
Yeah.
Next question is from Asanka Kumara. Is there a standard method of measurement used to measure any work involved under NEC FM contracts, i.e. NRM3 issued by the RICS? That's quite an interesting question. So embarrassingly, as a QS, I ought to know this one readily, and I'm not absolutely sure, other than I do know that NRM3, which is New Rules of Measurement 3, New Rules of Measurement have been produced by the RICS subsequent to SMM 5, 6 and 7, so we've now gone sort of SMM 8 that turned to a different approach using what's called NRM, or New Rules of Measurement. NRM 3 gives guidance on quantification and description of maintenance works for the purpose of preparing initial order of cost estimates. And the rules also aid the procurement and cost control of maintenance work. So it's in the right area, NRM 3, but they're not about methods of measurement, and therefore not about bills of quantities. They're really about cost control, so initial order of cost estimates and cost control. So I'm racking my brain here. I don't think I've actually seen any method of measurement for FM type works, and also the term service contract itself. If you think about the three main options, lump sum, target cost, and cost reimbursable, also don't lend themselves to methods of measurement. There is no such provision in the term service contract. So I can't think if there are any, or when you would actually need any. Why would you need, if you like, a bill of quantities? You may have a schedule of rates, but they're essentially quite different to a bill of quantities. So, John, can you think or add anything to this? Are you aware of any standard methods of measurement to cover FM?
One of the things that's ongoing is looking at benchmarking. Thinking in terms of FM services rather than sort of construction-related type projects where you're doing a refurbishment, say, there are measurements there that you use in terms of what quantity surveyors are using for you. But if you think about the other types of services that are around with cleaning, grounds maintenance, and those sorts of things, there isn't really a standard set of measurements. And one of the issues is that nobody really likes to share information too much. So BIFM are trying to put together some benchmarking information so that there are common ways of comparing buildings and the services within them. And I think that's something that's going to evolve a lot more quickly if we start to move to using standard forms of contract.
Yeah, I've seen, of course, schedules of rates and the like, but not actually bills of quantities that use standard methods of measurement. You know, does the market want that? Is that a need? Is it a gap? Or are they quite happy with lump sum schedules of rates, cost reimbursement, target costs? It is ultimately just a payment mechanism, isn't it? So,
yeah,
I've not heard that question asked of too many, you know, FM guys in the past. The simple answer is no, that I'm aware of, but it was a very convoluted answer, wasn't it?
Yeah. Okay. To agree, it feeds back into the previous question about evaluation matrices. You know, it would be a useful thing to have a standard measure.
Well, no, that's a good different type of debate, isn't it? In the first instance, you know, what are the standard payment mechanisms available? You know, does the term service contract presumably bring something different to the table? I suggest probably yes, it does with the target cost at least. Do we need more? Do we need something different? Do we have? Are they sufficient? So, you know, that's a good question to bat around within BIFM, I would suggest.
I think so, yeah. I shall pass that into the special interest group and let them chew that bone a bit.
Yeah, like two very good openers, aren't we? Cricket at the moment, not English openers, of course, but batting things around without scoring. And he runs with it. Okay, next question is from Jim Hislop. Any views on using the PSSC, so that's a professional services contract, professional services short contract, as against professional discipline standard forms, e.g. ACE, ICE. I'm not sure there is an ICE standard form for procuring professional services, but both of these contracts could be used in the FM sector, but are of course about engaging professionals, you know, buying professional advice, not necessarily that, of course, of a contractor to carry out sort of FM works themselves. As with any form of contract, I think as a client you've got to decide what it is that you're looking to buy. So in this case it looks like it's professional services. You've got to think about what sort of services you require, whether they're straightforward, whether they're quite complex, and that will help you decide whether the PSC or the PSSC is most appropriate. I think you've also got to look to match behaviours. So pick a form of contract that suits how you expect people to behave, how you expect the contract to be managed, and choose appropriately. I would suggest, I can't think of an instance I wouldn't use PSC or PSSC as opposed to an alternative form of contract. But you know, you need to make sure there's a good match between the conditions of contracts themselves and the risk allocation between the parties and the behaviour that you expect between the parties. Of course, NEC contracts are steeped in sort of project management principles. Most of the other standard forms are not. So, you know, hopefully you need a project managed based, you know, contracting arrangement, which is, you know, one of the reasons you might be looking towards NEC in the first place. Anything to add, John, on that? Or?
Yeah, I think that from my point of view, I could think of a number of occasions where we needed maybe to have a structural engineer on board as part of the early stages of a project maybe, or designing sprinkler systems where we've got a specialist engineer who's familiar with that type of work to help us, possibly bringing in an architect to support a bit of maybe planning around something that you're doing on building fabric type work. So those sorts of areas where you need to bring a specialist in. And I think if we're going to be using the NEC forms as the main contract documents, it makes a lot of sense to use the PSC or the PSSC as appropriate, because it will plug better into the main suite of documents. They're all part of the family, whereas if you use an alternative document, yes, it's is perfectly acceptable and it's a known quantity, but I think using the forms within the suite makes more sense to me.
Yeah, well, that's a really good point. Why would you want to buy people on a different basis? Why would you want to buy part of the supply chain who notify early warnings and have a contractor's plan and all the rest of it, and another part of the supply chain that does none of that? You wouldn't really want a mismatch of terms and conditions and behaviours. So it makes absolute sense to line things up, except that NEC does not demand that you must use forms of NEC contract down the supply chain or across the supply chain. It's horses for courses.
Yes.
Okay, next question from Puneet Atkan. I would like to ask if there are situations that the standard contract is changed and tailored according to client's vision, which may cause issues in openness and good project management practices. That's quite interesting. So I'm assuming the question is about changes that have a negative impact in terms of openness and good project management practices. Yeah, I've certainly seen situations that the contract is changed, not for the better, and they do cause issues in openness and good project management practices. And therefore I say to the client, are you using the right form in the first place? If you're going to take an NEC contract and turn it inside out and garrote it and impose your own terms and conditions miles away from the sort of NEC ethos, then frankly, don't bother using NEC in the first place. Use it because it's a fairly close fit, if not a perfect fit. There may be a need to make a few changes, a few set clauses for particular reasons, but if you're about undoing all the good things in terms of project management, practices in particular, then maybe it's not the form for you. Again, thoughts, John, on that?
I agree, yes. I mentioned in the original webinar that I don't favour making alterations to standard terms of contract. Occasionally you have to, and there are things that maybe you may say this particular clause will not apply in this instance, or it will be modified to read and vary the word slightly. But I think if I see when I've got my supplier's hat on, if I see something come through, you've got 1,000 forms of contract, and there are 10 or more amendments, Z clause, whatever, extra bits and pieces around it, I start to worry. My own personal view, when I'm trying to put a contract out and I'm under pressure from within the buying team, somebody saying, "Oh, I need this in the terms and conditions." In a lot of cases, they don't actually need to go in the terms and conditions. If it's around the client's vision, as the question puts it, you can quite often include that in the specification and say, this is why we try to do things. These things are important to us. You don't need to build them into the terms and conditions. So my bottom line on it is keep any changes to an absolute minimum. If you have got things that you need to put in, try and put them into the specification rather than terms and conditions.
Yeah, I was doing a training course yesterday actually, and I'm one of my usual rants saying that really I wish that clients would be more open at tender stage with their supply chain. I'm not talking about necessarily making certain documents contractual, but why not share things like the business case, and why not share their vision, and why not share their project execution plan, and why not share all sorts of things that actually may help the supply chain step up to the plate and deliver the client's objectives? Why is it a big secret?
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway.
We may be sharing the same soapbox here.
Yeah, it's not the biggest soapbox, is it? But there is a room for a couple more. So, this is a question. This is an internal question from Ray Pickman, who's the NEC manager. So, this one is for you, John, if that's okay. It says, how is BIFM raising awareness with their members on the use of NEC as a standard form of contract?
Well, we've got there's a number of things. There's a BIFM website which is available for anybody to have a look at. There are certain areas for members only, but there are things going on within the BIFM website that are supporting the awareness, or raising the awareness of the NEC contract. Social media is being used quite a bit. We've had a few tweets reminding people about the webinar we ran last week, and the follow-up to that, the recording of that is now available on the website to be looked at.
Yeah.
And the procurement special interest group are trying to push the awareness of it, where they support. Within the IFM, we have a number of regions around the country. The country split up geographically, and each region holds a number of events during the course of the year to help members come along, network, and to talk about things that are of interest. And through that, the special interest group are helping to promulgate the information around the NEC form suite and how they can be used. So the push is there, and it's really trying to awaken interest in it from everybody. And I think from the response we had to the webinar, it shows that there are people who are interested in the topic and are starting to look at the forms.
Okay, probably a question for me, this one. This is Sanka Kumara. I think it's the second question, actually, but thank you very much, Sanka. Why are NEC contracts not popular in the Middle East region? Yeah, very interesting. I spent a bit of time there on projects a number of years ago. Certainly went to Qatar. I was involved with a very large NEC project there. Abu Dhabi, there was a 17 billion US dollar project there. Araha Beach was involved with, and a number of projects in Dubai. And then suddenly, and there was some interest, so the supply chain was saying, I believe, to the client base, there's a different way of doing business outside of FIDIC. I think they persuaded the clients to look beyond FIDIC and try to enter a world of collaboration and cooperation. And I think they were winning the day, and then along came a nasty sort of recession throughout the world. And what I could see was that clients reverted back to sort of lowest cost mentality, and they unfortunately went back to using FIDIC. Well, I say unfortunately, that's just my opinion. And it's a shame, really, but that's where we are. So people believe that perhaps FIDIC gives, I'm not sure, maybe a better chance of a lower cost. I'm not sure I believe in that sort of ethos, but that's the feedback we were getting as to why the change back from sort of NEC to FIDIC. So, you go back to battle lines being prepared and, perhaps more adversarialism. There is still some good press and some good thoughts I've seen in the sort of UAE press, sort of construction press, saying, come on, we need to give this a better go. I don't know, John, have you been to the Middle East region? Worked in contracts there?
We've got a lot of the IFM members out in the Emirates and places like that. And I think there's possibly the cultural issue that there's a way of doing things in that part of the world which has been everybody's fallen in line with, and it's sometimes quite difficult to break that mould.
Yeah.
But I think if we're starting to see the emergence of the NEC forms as a document which is becoming more widely used, then certainly the fact that there are a lot of British people out there in FM and a lot of British suppliers are working out there, then we might start to see it gaining more penetration.
I would hope so. I would hope that people believe in the sort of ethos of mutual trust and cooperation and that sort of thing. In fact, there's an absolutely perfect fit, because in the UAE they're obligated by law in the contracts to use good faith. So there's an absolutely terrific fit with clause 10.1 in the first instance. So it's quite surprising how there hasn't been a bigger update, but maybe it's a time thing. Okay. Next question from Gavin Brown. Is it likely then that if an NEC contractor prospective service provider will be accepted within FM? They ask because my experience is that service providers always try to insist that their contracts, terms and conditions override others. So this is, push and pull. So will service providers accept NEC3 contract terms? And I would see, I see no reason why not. In fact, a lot of influence to use NEC, I find, comes from the supply chain. You say there must be a better way. We're bashing into each other's heads. Surely there's a better way of working. Surely we can actually work more cooperatively, better together. And I think what I found is NEC is people regard it as a neutral set of terms and conditions. It favours neither the employer nor not a contractor, certainly the TSC, and it favours the project. And every time there's a problem, it says, let's solve the problem in the interest of the project, of the FM services that we're providing. And therefore people like that sort of neutrality. They like the fact that it's not weighted towards buyer or seller, whereas the own sort of seller's T's and C's will undoubtedly be biased towards them. So, there is no good reason why the prospective service provider would accept, wouldn't accept the use of NEC contracts. Any thoughts, John?
Yeah, absolutely. There is always a push from the supplier to use their own terms and conditions, and that applies particularly where you get maybe mechanical service contracts. You think about things like photocopier maintenance, lift maintenance, and things like that. There is a lot of OEM type of input, and there are times when maybe you do need to accept the supplier's terms and conditions in those circumstances, particularly if it protects the warranty on the individual piece of equipment.
Yeah.
But from a point of view of the more general FM contracts, I think you're quite right. It is a neutral contract form suite and works perfectly well for both sides. So I think if on BIFM's pressure with trying to put the suite out there into the FM community, we are dealing from a BIFM point of view with both the suppliers and the clients.
Yeah.
So that should help. If you're having a problem introducing the suite, and suppliers are coming back and saying, we want ours to prevail, just push. There is the issue of the relative strength of the parties. And if you're a small client dealing with a big supplier, they have a lot of clout, and you have to push against that. But I would always insist on that. And possibly an indicator that I've seen in recent years, the electronic procurement systems that have been adopted, virtually all of them, when you set up your tender project, there's a little box in there which the supplier has to tick to say they accept the terms and conditions that are supplied. And if they don't tick it, it's a killer. It's one of those things that comes back and says, virtually automatically reject this bid. So there is a move from within the procurement side, the client side of the industry, to try and have their own terms and conditions in place. But if we've got this mutual set in the case of the NEC forms, then the objections start to fall away.
You would think so. You would hope so, anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, next, just a couple more questions. Actually, this one is almost identical from Slop. Why do you think the service industry in particular constantly make every effort to apply their own backward invoice type style T's and C's, irrespective of what's issued in the tender? It's a slight quirk, so crikey, that's hard work, isn't it? So here's a set of T's and C's, and somebody basically puts in the qualification, I would suggest. So the client decides the form of contract, let's say, NEC, and some suppliers may attach their own T's and C's to their actual offer, which would be, a qualified tender. So you need to be aware of that. You need to deal with that. Why do they do that? Any idea why they actually do that in the first instance?
Again, it's trying to, from the supplier's point of view, if you look at it from their aspect, they're dealing with all sorts of clients across all sorts of sectors, private sector, public sector, third sector. And in a lot of cases, every single client is providing a different set of terms and conditions. So it gets very, very difficult to manage that sort of situation. If you've got 50 clients and they've all got different terms and conditions on their contract, it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
So, well, I'm going to put ours on, and we'll try and push to use ours as the dominant set. But again, if we can move the industry towards the NEC forms as a standard, then that problem goes away.
Yeah, I would implore the suppliers effectively to have a look at the likes of the term service contract, term service short contract, and maybe the client in advance says, by the way, guys, just to tell you, you'll be getting the inquiry documents shortly. They'll be based on this form of contract. Go have a quick look at it and make sure you're comfortable with it. Any issues, give me a shout before to issue the inquiry documents. You know, it's all a little bit too late and quite annoying, I would imagine, when you get it's sort of qualified tender. So try and make a bit of effort to have some constructive dialogue before sending out the chosen T's and C's. You know, engage. It's about talking, isn't it, really? Just communicate with your supply chain and vice versa. Okay, last two questions. This one's quite easy. The answer is yes. The answer is no. Do you have to purchase the full suite of contract, or can you just buy one or two elements? The answer, of course, is yes, you can buy one element, one of the contracts, one of the guidance notes, one of the flowcharts, or the whole suite. I think it's about 40-odd documents that make up sort of contracts, guidance notes, flowcharts, and how-to guides. If you are solely procuring FM contractors, then there might be sort of 4, 5 or 6 documents within the suite that are associated with that. But if you're a client perhaps buying goods, works or services, then maybe the whole suite is applicable. So yeah, you have to decide what it is that you need and pick from the suite which aligns best with that choice. Okay, the final question from Chris Jeffers. Considering the nature of most FM contracts, what do you think is the best way to manage the many conversation events that potentially arise from both employer and contractor? This one worries me a little bit. So what we're saying is because of FM contracts, the nature of it, lots of change arises, lots of things that were different to the original contract, the original bargain that was struck. Lots of conversation events worry me. Because that's a lot of change from the initial price, from the initial thing that was put forward. So, you know, might you be better in some instances by having just a purely cost reimbursable contract? If you envisage an absolute cascade of change, then I don't think a lump sum contract will help you there. I don't think a target cost contract will help you there. Maybe the sort of scheduler rates type approach might be applicable, providing these sort of additional services are in keeping with the original sort of scheduling rates. But maybe if you're also using a cost reimbursable contract, that may not be to some people's sort of appetite, if you like. But you know, lots of change isn't good. It isn't good for anybody. Any thoughts on that, John?
I agree. I think my feeling on this one is that when you look at some of these contracts where there's a lot of change, you find that with that comes delay.
Yeah.
Contract completion tends to end up 6, 7, 8, 9 more weeks behind where it ought to have been. Whereas if you'd actually put a couple of weeks delay at the front while you really bottomed out the specification and some of the details, it would have been time well invested. I know that's not always the reason, but from my experience, a lot of the contracts where you get a lot of change come because the thing wasn't thought out properly to begin with. It was maybe rushed into getting the tenders out because there was a deadline set in concrete and nobody was willing to challenge it. Then you find as you get into the job that, well, you can't do it that way because of this and so on. If you thought about it properly first, you would realise. But so yeah, I think trying to get the specification a bit tighter and spending a bit more time on the specification, even if it means delaying starting the job, you'll probably end up finding you'll finish a lot quicker.
Yeah, I would agree. So dealing with this stuff at the back end, to me, it's just you know, chaos. It is a chaotic way to realise a client's objectives, and you know, it's sometimes complete madness. So you've got to set the thing up right in the first place. So the front end has got to be set up correctly. There's far too few people believe in things like, you know, simple things like risk management. Just having like a project risk register before you're preparing the inquiry documents ready to go to tender. And this thing will scream at you saying, there is so much uncertainty, there is so much risk, there are so many things that we haven't yet bottomed out. And if you press the go button, then, you know, I think that's madness. You know, be prepared for a chaotic contract there. It doesn't matter what the contract form is, it's the same with any construction contract. So, you know, at that point where you have so much uncertainty, so much risk, then if you absolutely have to press the button now to go, then maybe cost reimbursable is the only logical and sensible way forward. If you can wait those few weeks and if you can bottom things out, then you're reducing the risk of and uncertainty, and therefore maybe the sort of lump sum schedule rates target cost comes into play.
That's right. Yeah, the risk register really does play its part. I was thinking about just something I was doing last evening, reviewing some material from a year ago, and we were running into almost 3 months of solid rain in this country, and some of the storms that came with it were horrendous. Now, we knew that the weather was going to be bad. We didn't realise it was going to be quite that bad.
Yeah.
But a couple of the projects I was involved with this time last year, we were assessing that risk through the risk register and identifying the fact that there were going to be delays, there were going to be changes, there were the issues around the compensation type events that were going to happen. And as you rightly say, putting it in the risk register and understanding it, you can think about that beforehand and you can agree how you're going to deal with it. And that could possibly be an additional little clause that you could add in. I know I'm not in favour of too many, but you could deal with those sorts of things if you plan it up front.
Yeah, I don't think we get the concept of risk management. I still think we put it in the sort of QA box, one of the unnecessary evil things. But, they're the way it's a tool. It's a great process to help sensible people make sensible decisions. And I think it helps us act as adults and have sort of adult discussions and sort of relationships, just like the point you made about the weather thing there. Have an adult discussion about the inevitability, the impact of this incoming bad weather. Don't stick your head in a bucket of sand and hope that it turns out okay. So, okay, thank you very much indeed for that, John. So I think that wraps up all the questions that we had. So thank you to everybody who submitted questions. If you do have any subsequent ideas on what you would say, possible future events that different and NEC could put together, any further webinars, any papers that would be helpful, any further guidance, then do please let us know through the users group membership. Further details of that were in the closing slide, I believe, of the NEC FM webinar. So thanks to John, thanks to Chris Moriarty who was here for the previous questions. Thanks to everybody for submitting questions. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.